what gets really distracting is the shiny objects and the hype, and not stopping to think, great, are these items actual true sellers? Paying attention to what's on the shelves. What are your clients actually buying? And then paying attention to, when are they buying them? Are they high margin items, or do they only move when they're on sale? So paying attention to those behaviors. I'm anxious and hopeful to see more smart business acumen coming through for retailers in cannabis in general.
What's up? Welcome back to High Touch, the podcast about how cannabis brands and retailers create meaningful, real-world experiences. I'm Duffy.
And I'm Jake, and we are just now recovering from hosting 250 budtenders in Denver last week for our very first ever Spark Society in-person event. It was pretty awesome. Did you have a good time, Andrew?
I had a great time. Shout out to everyone who came through. It was great meeting budtenders, our end users of the product, and the people that make the cannabis industry go around. It was an insane night. We had...
Don't forget the magician.
I wasn't going to forget the magician. We had budtenders, we had brands, we had vendors, we had the Sparkplug team, we had the magician came through, blew everyone's minds, all packed into a really cool...
Mostly because they couldn't remember what card they'd picked in the first place.
Yeah, that was a little bit of a challenge when, Ace of Spades starts to look a little bit like Two of Clubs. It all kind of starts to blur together in your mind. But yeah, shout out to Tetra Lounge, great consumption space in Denver, really cool location in Rhino. Should drop by if you're in the area.
Yeah, it was a super cool event. Awesome to talk to users of Sparkplug, and they had a bunch of brands come out as well. Super energizing. Always fun to talk to folks on the front lines. We had a great time. We also had the Flowhub team there repping, doing some cool interviews. And speaking of Flowhub, today's guest is Melissa Hanson, the VP of Operations at Flowhub. We're excited to chat with Melissa. She's pretty new at Flowhub, but she has a ton of experience in the cannabis industry. She's worked at MedMen, at Sunburn, Michael Kors in a previous life, so she has that background in specialty high-end retail. We get into some stuff about clienteling, some of the constant challenges these cannabis operators face working across this patchwork of regulations in the US. So it's a great interview. Super excited to have Melissa on.
Yeah, really rare opportunity to talk to somebody who has such deep experience on the operator side and has transitioned into the supporting technology side, which you always love to see because they know the pain points, they know the problems really intimately. They have done the work of scaling a business, whether that's a fashion brand or whether it's a cannabis brand or a cannabis retail group. So yeah, great stuff from Melissa, and hope you enjoy it.
We have you joining here from Flowhub. Melissa Hanson is the VP of Operations currently of Flowhub. She's led 500-person teams at Michael Kors. She's built cannabis delivery ops at MedMen, scaled vertically integrated retail in Florida, and now she's helping to build that back end that powers dispensary excellence. I'm excited to get into some of the story here with you. You've worked in luxury fashion and obviously led those other cannabis operations, and I'm curious to hear, from your perspective, what connects a Michael Kors fitting room with a dispensary POS system. Give us that through line.
Yeah, I make the joke that I'm the client whisperer, right? We in retail have our own verbiage that's used and how we define processes. So as cannabis retail is expanding and growing, there's a lot of similarities to mainstream retail, and it's natural. So being able to speak the same language as the client, being able to articulate just a natural sales process, client engagement, being able to ensure that our systems and software smooth out all the kinks that the retailers are feeling on their end.
So I guess maybe speaking to your experience transitioning from more traditional retail into cannabis. What were your first impressions? What was your impression of the first dispensary that you walked into, or the first cannabis brand you really, came into contact with? Was that jarring, or did it feel like a natural transition?
It felt like a natural transition. It actually was more purposeful. So I transitioned from mainstream retail into cannabis after I had my children. And I think anybody who's a parent understands the shift of who you are and the value and what your purpose is in life. And I started to ask myself, what am I doing? And who needs another black handbag? Who needs another pair of jeans? Talent development fell short. And it switched into this moment of, I want to make sure that we're doing more education, and education not only from a product side, which cannabis obviously gives us a plethora of opportunities to do so, but also from the sales aspect of it, and making sure that the bud tenders and the teams that are delivering the product truly understands how to speak to a client, how to build that rapport, how to translate the product value into the customer's hands. So that transition felt really nice. It was also the first time in my career, selfishly, that I didn't have to fix or elevate an already established environment. This was the first time that I was able to build teams from the bottom up. So it was really exciting to be able to staff the right people and put really similar and different backgrounds together to find out what works and what was successful. So that was a really cool moment. But yeah, there's a lot of brands out there that you walk into, the dispensaries, the look, the feel, the aesthetic, the flow, unfortunately or fortunately, some of them have still felt very trap shop.
Mm.
Whereas then you have some brands that have the open concept and, making shopping for cannabis feel just as normal as walking into a regular retail mall.
That's a really interesting take that, a lot of people we've talked to who have transitioned from a really successful career in mainstream retail into cannabis find it to be a really chaotic environment, because it's the definition of an industry where people are building the plane as it's flying, and sometimes building the plane while it's crashing. So it's really interesting to hear that blank slate for you was really an opportunity to have an impact at the ground floor of the industry itself.
I'd have to see if they've ever worked in an outlet before. I mean, we managed chaos. That was everything that retail does. You plan for your dress rehearsal, your Black Friday.
Mm.
And in cannabis, I think all the years for me going through those moments of holiday really taught kind of an innate behavior for those environments where we have fits and starts. I mean, look at cannabis, just even what's happening with New York right now with BioTrack and that switch. It's the hurry up and wait, and then the start and stop and pivot over here. So yeah, it's an interesting adventure. But no, I think that it is exciting too. It gave you an opportunity to have the hindsight to already know what works and what doesn't work. And a lot of cannabis retailers, unfortunately, most of them don't come from retail or established brands where there's a set process and standard to be able to use as a foundation.
Yeah, something that we hear a lot about from maybe luxury retail is the idea of clienteling. And I think that's a word that is maybe misunderstood or poorly understood. Could you explain, from your background in high-end retail, the approach to clienteling and what that means, and how a store kind of operationalizes a culture of clienteling, and maybe what you see in cannabis, and how some of the operators that you've worked with, both on the ground floor, in the shops, as well as now, in your capacity at Flowhub, how they're kind of embracing a clienteling ethos.
I think, clienteling, to sum it up from a parallel, would be loyalty. A customer is someone that is walking in the door, you interact with them for a brief moment and they leave. Clienteling is really getting down to the core of that relationship. Why are you shopping with us? Why is our product a good fit for you? Why are you tied to that brand specifically? And as mainstream, retail has shown us, having strong clientele, that's where these brands really thrive and stay true to who they are, and the business grows. In cannabis, this is where, we challenge our bud tenders and we challenge our clients to slow down for a minute and find out who the client is that we're servicing. What are the reasons they're walking in the door? If it's a recreational market versus a medicinal market, the medicinal patient for sure spend time asking the questions. What ingestion method has worked for them? When's the last time they've been exposed to cannabis? I think that's the other adventure with this industry. There's a lot of past users that are coming back and revisiting it again legally. There's a lot of new users coming in who've never tried cannabis before. And then there's a lot of repeat users who've modified how they use. If they used to prefer smokable flower and now they need more discrete methods, and being able to connect with them fast. So at Flowhub, we've built a system and what we call our Greet app to make sure that you have your clienteling book for those of us back in the day of writing down, what are the details that we need to know about this individual and how does that tie back into our experience with them. But those are features and they go the extra mile.
Absolutely. So it really sounds like that's where hospitality becomes a part of the retail experience. It's not just you're walking in here and I'm going to sell you something. It's you're walking in here for an experience. We're going to build a relationship over time. And as with all things, it has to be enabled by technology, having the right system in place to be able to recognize a person when they come in, make them feel like they're a part of a community, even though you might not actually remember them. That's a really powerful set of tools.
Yeah, I mean, you nailed it though. The interaction with the client is what defines a store from a brand. I use the comparable of Vans. You can buy Vans sneakers at a Tilly's, you can buy it at a Nordstrom's, but you can also go to Vans flagship stores. There's a different experience you get when you walk into a flagship store. So as a retailer, are you wanting to be just a shop or are you wanting to be a brand? And your tone, how you engage with your clients, your marketing, even from the products that you offer, I think really define who your target audience is and staying true to that.
So from your experience with MedMen, with Sunburn, is there anything that an industry like cannabis, which, as we've discussed, is popping up essentially overnight, at least in the grand scheme of things, is there anything that you think the more traditional retail world can learn from cannabis, or places where cannabis is really on the leading edge, whether that's from a branding or a store design or experience design, or even, obviously from your current experience, a technology perspective?
So innovation. So not only just looking at Sunburn and MedMen, but scale out at the industry as a whole. We don't know what we don't know, and so we don't know it. And with cannabis specifically, there's been a lot of new product things that are coming out. There are endless studies that keep populating. And that I think is where mainstream retail fell quiet, is on new and creative and really digging into how their products are being used. That would be something I think it would be interesting to do a study of in the past when retailers were having some innovative moments in their life cycle and how that tied to their brand recognition and just in general profit, and being able to marry that same life cycle with cannabis. I just hope it doesn't die down. That's the part that we need to make sure is still fueled.
So, kind of in a similar vein, you work with so many dispensary operators in your role on a day-to-day basis. And I'd love to hear, just you kind of hit on one just now about SMS limiting for loyalty. What are some of the other sort of kind of operational friction points that you're encountering with your customer base and things that you're kind of coaching those folks through? And, of course, I think Flowhub is solving problems all across that stack, but what are some of those challenges that are kind of bubbling to the top and keeping you busy these days?
Some of the trends that we're seeing that are challenging come from recreating the rules as we're playing the game. So regulators are changing up how we have to manage the compliance side, and that gives a lot of the stores some really hard challenges to go up against. If it's managing deli style bulk flour and now having to shift into a pre-pack, managing all the different variants and building that out appropriately, RTBs, waste. Then you deal with medical side of it, how allotments are issued on each ingestion method, making sure that we don't oversell. Then you have issues where there's fines involved. And as the platform, we can only control and influence so much, but the education side to our clients is really important, making sure they understand how they have to operate, staying up to date. As we mentioned, every state manages it differently. So it's not just a one size fits all.
Totally. That's something that we absolutely struggle with, in our kind of capacity at Sparkplug and in our roles, just working coast to coast in this patchwork of regulatory minutia. How do you keep it straight in your head and with your team? I imagine that your days are stacked, back to back, talking to folks across all different markets, and you're shifting gears and putting on a kind of different hat, and any kind of tricks that you found to keep your head on straight?
You said it, the team. We are a wonderful platform. I think we have, I'm being a little biased, but I think we have the best team, period. The fact that we don't just hire generalists, but we amplify specialty is really important. The teams that we have internally to collaborate with are extremely supportive. I think that's the part for us that is critical as we're working through some of these problems in the moment, just as the clients are facing them. We have a tremendous amount of collaboration and support between our engineering side, our client success side, to our product support side. There's a lot of quick pinging, making sure that everyone understands and respects their roles, and education, right? We're constantly teaching each other something new or a different insight. Again, this is a choose your own adventure. So we spend a lot of time on even hindsight. What worked, what didn't work? What are we seeing that is successful on how our clients are operating? And then where can we help educate and streamline those operators?
That sounds like a really great culture, and I think it really fits the goal of Flowhub from the perspective of taking those retail best practices and building them into that technology tool that makes those paths and processes as easy as possible. It makes them actually the path of least resistance. I feel like that's something that, really stands out at Flowhub is ease of use. How do we make the best path the easiest path? So, yeah, I guess I'm curious, how do you feel like Flowhub builds product in that way? There's a lot of people who might think of the point of sale system as just, this is a box to check. We got to have this. It's the pipes. If we don't set it up, then we're not going to be able to operate. That might be the approach that maybe a new dispensary operator takes to the idea of setting up their POS. How do you shift that perspective? How do you turn this into something where they recognize, hey, this is actually an opportunity to level up and be the best operator I can be?
We think about the end user. When we're building out reporting, we're asking ourselves, who's using this reporting? Tailoring any product solution to the end user is critical. You go into an elementary school, the desks and the chairs are smaller for a reason. It's the same thing when we're building reports and functions. Is it the C-suite team that's going to be accessing it, or is it our budtenders? If it's the budtenders, how do we make it more seamless for them? We challenge our operators, especially on the executive level. A 3-second delay doesn't seem long, right? When you're not in front of the client, when you're not behind the POS, when you don't have a full showroom, but 3 seconds is a really long time. So being smart about how we support it, how we interact, there's a lot of thought that goes into what we roll out, and not just where we are today, but future. We have a whole team of us that discuss and vet out feature requests. We are extremely collaborative with our clients. I think that's what sets us apart, at least from my experience. My previous POS systems, no one took the opportunity to ask what was working or what wasn't working. We do. We ask the question, how can we be better and how can we improve where the kinks are? And we take that feedback and apply it and start to ask the questions of, is that something we can solve today? Is it something we can solve in the future? And how can we solve this and amplify it so that they're successful?
Super cool. What are some of those asks that you've gotten that, maybe made you think or brought you back to your days in the store on the floor? Any kind of recurring pain that brought back some of those memories?
Yeah, we have a really key operator for us that very soon in my onboarding with Flowhub had brought up upselling and being able to manage and track behaviors for upselling, not only from a behavioral aspect of who is successfully upselling to the client or to their customer, excuse me, but also what, right? What are the products that we're seeing that are easy add-ons? And it was wonderful to be able to slow down and turn to the team and say, here's why we're asking the question. Here's what the benefit is. And being able to speak to true selling and that true sales culture that is basically education and tying back the right products. It also led us to follow that chain of thought process into our deals. How do we build up promotions? What are the right items and categories that hook together just based on looking at the reporting of what's being upsold together, so we can have some predictive analytics to share and guide our clients into digging into when they're building out their inventory.
For sure. Having the tech kind of disappear behind the scenes and just enter that flow state. As I know Kyle and the rest of your team love to evangelize. You talked a little bit about the culture, and I'd love to hear about the culture at Flowhub beyond kind of like collaboration, maybe speaking a little bit to like customer empathy. I think that the team at Flowhub has drawn from a lot of different, from what I can tell, right, across the cannabis industry, operators, people with your type of background in more traditional and specialty retail. How do you think your kind of context and operational expertise has informed your day to day and the way that you're leading the team?
So to your point, it's not only collaboration, but it's teaching and having empathy. I have a saying of perspective is reality. And understanding that bud tender or that client who's calling in when they're frustrated, being empathetic to where they're standing in their shoes and understanding, okay, what that feels like. So as we're inviting people in to join our team and through the hiring process, we spend time asking those questions. When have you had those challenging moments before? What are the challenging moments you've encountered? And, how did you guide yourself through it? There's a lot of quick action that needs to happen in cannabis. So we do ask the question and pay attention to, moving with maximum urgency, but making sure that we're acting quick and not rushed, being smart about how we're making decisions, leveraging the tools and resources we have around us. I think the people piece and where they come from, leveraging their background. If you've never done Strength Finder, I'm a big advocate of it. One of the competencies is individualization, and that is in one of my top 5, along with empathy. And I spend time on that with the people because the platform's only as great as the people behind it. And at the end of the day, it is still just technology. And as we move forward in this, AI is everywhere. There's a human element that people still crave and need. So being able to pick up the phone or, being able to have an email conversation, a video call where you can see someone's face and smile and laugh and have a moment of connection is really important. So we make sure that those moments are happening.
Are you able to get into the field very often, face to face?
Yeah, I'm based in Florida. So, being able to see the operators here when we do travel, that's something I spend a lot of time in the other dispensaries, even, clients who aren't ours yet, just to be able to see the workflow. We invite and encourage our team to do outings and do, comp shopping and being able to see what are the potential pain points operators are seeing. Being the customer for a day is really insightful to understand what's written on a receipt, as silly as that is, but the script and how promotions are built out, that matters. That's an end use. That'll dictate if that customer is going to go back or not and really become a client. But yeah, we get in the field as much as we can. Our sales team obviously is in the field a little bit more so than some of our support agents, but we get in the field. We like to be able to be in the moment. You'll see on our site that we do a lot of client stories. So we do highlight our client and our operators because we have a wide variety of users.
For sure. I feel like cannabis dispensaries have kind of a template, right? A cookie cutter kind of, one size fits all approach that people that you might expect to encounter when you walk into a store. You go in and you get your ID taken, and you walk in and there's a big counter, and you go up and you look at some stuff in a case and look behind the counter and see what they're offering and decide and then buy and walk out. But I think I've seen over the past couple of years a lot of stores kind of breaking that mold and experimenting with different workflows on the floor, really leaning into some more kind of experiential retail approaches. Is there anything that you've come across in Florida or elsewhere, or even, among your customer base now, that you think is particularly compelling or innovative, or just kind of breaking that format?
Breaking the mold, I actually have to give a nod and recognition to MedMen. I think, if we go back in time, they were the first brand that really showed up defining an aesthetic
Mm.
and being a national brand. They made sure it was a rinse and repeat in each state. They're, they spent a lot of money making sure that store was well branded, and it works. There is a tremendous amount of brand recognition. They were the pioneers for creating this open showroom and not the stale, here's your waiting area you have to sit awkwardly in before you get taken back and escorted, and then the pressure to look at a menu really quick and make an order. That's changed. They've really shown it can feel more mainstream and walking into an open showroom and being able to preview shop. I think the other part that's been huge is we've seen a very fast increase in pre-ordering just with the launch of ecom. So not only do you have these marketplace like Weed Maps, you now have ecom sites, and how ourselves alone, like we see a 27% increase in our cart baskets just with pre-ordering and ecom. You're allowing the customer who's comfortable shopping online, knowing what their budget is, being able to sell in that way. We're seeing kiosks being used, prepayment. There's a lot of different normalized behavior, I guess you could say, for cannabis consumers happening right now that are very parallel to what we see in retail. But again, I do think that there are some trap shops still where you walk into it and it's a waiting room and it still feels very stale and stagnant as you progress through. I again, I challenge the operators a lot to put themselves in the shoe of the customer. What's the experience and how do you want them to feel? If you're okay and comfortable with them sitting in a waiting room before their name gets called back, okay. versus walking in and having a good time, taking a look around. What's on the walls in your store? What's the message you're trying to share is really important.
Mm. So that segues nicely into something I've been curious about. I know that the Flowhub ecom release, that's a huge new product for you all, and I'm sure has been, very exciting for the retailers on Flowhub to be able to kind of unify that experience. How do you take something like ecom in cannabis, which has existed for some time and has a lot of folks building towards that goal, and how do you make that uniquely Flowhub? How do you make that sort of both challenging but also familiar and quality experience that you all have built into the POS? I guess maybe take me through how you all thought about what you wanted your ecom experience to be like uniquely as Flowhub.
So our product, our POS, there, if we talk about it, it's really hard to be a self-service onboarding experience because there's a lot of different ways to build out a deal. There's a lot of different ways to build out your workflow. And we did that intentionally. Each state's managed so differently. So there's a tremendous amount of options. We did the same thing with ecom. And there's a lot of different ways you can build it out, from your color scheme to how you want your product tiles to look and feel. That's really important, as well as the ease of use. Because it's our ecom, it syncs in with our POS seamlessly. There's not another virtual handshake. So operators who are using different platforms for their ecom with our POS, there's someone who's building out a deal in Flowhub and then has to open up another browser and build a deal or a promotion in another platform that might not do the same math equation or the math logic to get there. It's just more manpower. It's extra spend. It's extra waste. It's extra calorie burn that doesn't need to be there. And then to identify when it breaks, you have two different platforms to look at. with our ecom, it's an extension of our POS. Seamless. It's really easy to use. The look and feel feels very similar to what you're comfortable with for the POS. It hooks in if you use our kiosk option as well. But it gives us that flexibility as we upgrade our POS and add features. Same thing on ecom. It syncs together really beautifully.
How's that being received? I see a lot of discourse online right now, on Cannabis LinkedIn about the notion of a walled garden and, all-in-one solutions versus more open platforms that play nicely. I think that Flowhub probably falls somewhere in the middle, right? Optionality, seamless, all-in-one approach, but going to maintain the flexibility and the open ecosystem. Flowhub, of course, kind of pioneered the open API ecosystem in the cannabis industry, but opinions and perspectives kind of being advocated for online. You're so close to the customer. Do you have a sense for what the operators are really asking for? I hear people just want things to work and really don't care too much, honestly, about how it gets done. But, are you getting kind of more perspective there?
Yeah, I mean, listen, at the end of the day, our success is defined by our client's success. So we are a platform to use how we can support your success, period. It doesn't have to be complicated. If, depending on what your needs are for marketing, depending on what your needs are for ecom, depending on what your needs are for the POS and for your workflow and for your compliance integrations, et cetera, we've took a position where we have an open API. We can integrate successfully with whoever's out there. Just let us know, right? That's easy. It's an easy solution. Most other operators don't. They pride themselves in this all-in-one. Well, sometimes all-in-one isn't the best for that individual end use. So we give you the option. If you want to build your portfolio a la carte with Flowhub, great. You want to use our POS, our ecom, our kiosk, but you would prefer, a different pay provider, fine. Vice versa. If you want to use our Flowhub Pay and you want to be able to use, our kiosk and our ecom, the whole suite, wonderful. But we're here at their needs. There's the other reality part is that it is a small world in cannabis. And sometimes we have relationships with other vendors that need to be protected. We support that. That's our job, is to support our clients' end use. So if that means that we need to keep it as an open API, we will.
Well, I'd like to look towards the future. Forwarding 2 years, what's something that's bothering operators today that we can kind of say confidently we've really solved for?
I would love to say the banking is solved and we have not as much friction for the operators in general with banking solutions from just an investment side of it, as well as consumer side. But I think, to answer your question, the locations that are currently operating, but I hope to see adapted, is not feeling like they have to recreate the wheel and taking a minute and looking back at data and past performance that we've seen in mainstream retail to see what works and what doesn't work, and being able to be making really smart decisions if it's based on who they're hiring and how they're staffing, paying attention to shopping behaviors. When are people coming through the door? Not just waiting for 420 or 710, like paying attention to consumer behavior, the events around them. How are they showing up from a marketing perspective? Are they doing any community outreach? Or are they just waiting for somebody to walk through? Paying attention to product trends. I think that's, a huge opportunity. What gets really distracting is the shiny objects and the hype, and not stopping to think, great, are these items actual true sellers? Paying attention to what's on the shelves. What are your clients actually buying? And then paying attention to when are they buying them? Are they high margin items, or do they only move when they're on sale? So paying attention to those behaviors. I'm anxious and hopeful to see more smart business acumen coming through for retailers in cannabis in general.
Yeah, that sounds like what I'm hearing. More kind of data-driven decision making, operators leaning more into, all the wealth of visibility that they should have. And I think in order to get them there, we're counting on businesses like Flowhub and all the other great tech providers in the space to get those friction and small pain points and the daily fires, put out so that these folks can kind of take a step back and really think strategically about their businesses.
The way I see it, retailers in cannabis have been training with a weighted vest on. My dream is a world in which the banking regulations and the 280E taxation go away, and then all of these operators that have been operating with such grit and such effort and grinding it out just to get by, suddenly their profit margin has increased by 5x because they're not getting charged an 80% effective tax rate. So they're now able to invest and take all those learnings and take all that ability and unleash it in the way that an operator might be able to in any standard industry. So I hope for that future as well. And I think that it's a dynamic that the technology platforms are operating under as well. The customers that we're servicing have a lot less free cash flow than equivalent businesses might have in other industries. So we have to make sure that we are very usable, very useful, very high ROI. And I think that that is good training. When things hopefully normalize, then ultimately, everyone in the industry is operating with a lot less weight on their shoulders.
I can't say that any better. So good job.
Wow, thanks.
Melissa Hanson is the Vice President of Operations at Flowhub. She's led national retail teams, launched cannabis delivery ops, and now helps dispensaries run smarter, smoother, and more profitably. Melissa, thank you so much for joining us here on High Touch. Where can our listeners find you online?
Thank you. Come look us up, flowhub.com. You can take a peek, suggest a demo. I strongly encourage everyone to take a peek at eCom. It looks fantastic. It's a great extension of our POS. Thanks for having me, guys.
Fabulous. Thanks so much, Melissa.
Take care. All right. That was awesome. Melissa is one of those people that makes operations feel like a creative endeavor, huh? Not just checklists and compliance.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think it was really cool to hear how she thinks about people as the fundamental building blocks of great systems, whether that's your retail team who's making a great experience for the customer, or that's the Flowhub team knowing the customers really well, hearing their feedback, and having that empathetic, creative mindset to then come together and collaborate on building great tools for those people. So something we've been hearing more and more, just that the people are really the key for making these businesses successful, either on the technology side or on the operator side.
100%. Well, thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of High Touch. Glad you came by to hang out. I'm Jake. This is Andrew. Thank you to Isabel Carter from our team for the production assistance, and we'll catch you soon.
Bye.